Good afternoon and welcome to the third in the series of Isle of Man Government Q&A briefings, where you get the chance to ask the questions to the people involved in the decisions which are affecting all our lives right now, and no doubt will continue to do so for some time yet. If he is fed up of us answering questions from all and sundry, including many ad infinitum, he's hiding it well, because our guest today is the Health Minister, the Health and Social Care Minister, David Ashford. I don't want social care to be the poor relation. Thank you for joining us, back for more. I think this is our equivalent of Hancock's half hour, probably. Matt, not Tony. So thank you very much. Again, we have a plethora of points the public has submitted, which we will try and bring you a flavour of. We've also got one caller waiting on the line, and we will come to him shortly. I just want to give you a reminder to do keep the questions coming for future briefings as well. COVID-19 community support at gov.im, COVID-19 community support at gov.im is the email address. Lots to talk about. They say a week's a long time in politics, and it's my word, a lot's happened since we last spoke, Minister. So we'll get to all the points. But first of all, if I may, just to get us going, I have one here from Brian. And just bringing it right back up to date and topical. He's talking about yesterday's protest march, in which he says that the organisers have certainly say it's been a success, but showed little regard, he says, for social distancing. And while many of us are working on the front line, he says these people have nothing better to do than start pandemic part 2. So there's one to get the social media and the Manx forums to socially combust. Over to you, Minister.
Yeah, thank you for that, James, and thank you to Brian for the question. In relation to the protest march, obviously the enforcement of law is a police matter. Politicians set the law and it's for the police to enforce it. I know the police and the Chief Constable engaged very strongly with the organisers of the protest to ensure that they could meet the requirements of the gatherings law. So I know where possible social distancing the police did attempt to implement down there. I watched some of the live feed. I wasn't down there, but I saw some of the live feed off one of the radio stations' Facebook page. From what I saw in the general gist of it, people were social distancing, and I know that the police tried to keep people into groups of 10 as well to comply with the gatherings. I made quite clear on a couple of interviews I did last week that people needed to make the decision that was right for them. We are in the middle of a worldwide pandemic, and yes, the island is in a very good position compared to a lot of other countries, but we certainly cannot guarantee that we are COVID-free, that there isn't levels of transmission out there in the community. So I made quite clear from my personal point of view as Health Minister that people needed to think about what they were doing, whether it was right for them or their family, and people had that individual choice to make as to whether they took part yesterday or not.
Just playing devil's advocate then, let me ask you, what are we distancing from exactly?
Well, one of the things we know about this is that it's not it's a hidden enemy. Basically, a virus is not something you can see. We know from studies around the world that a lot of people who carry COVID-19 either don't present symptoms at all, or they present such low-level symptoms that they will dismiss it as something else, as a cold or just not feeling quite right. And as the scientific evidence builds, we know that there is that cohort of people, but equally there is unfortunately people who do get COVID-19 who get very severe symptoms, in fact in some cases tragically terminal symptoms. And so we cannot say with any certainty, even although we've been so many days without, which I think is now 19 at the point of recording, with days without a case, that does not mean that the island is COVID-free.
Thank you very much. Well, we have had a lot of questions, as I say, and while some will be fairly repetitive or have similar themes, we'll try and amalgamate them into one or two, so we make sure we cover the main points to take those into account, because obviously the Minister won't be able to answer every single question that's been submitted, or we'd be here for quite some time. Just before we go to our caller, though, one more. If distancing is required here now, as you just intimated it isn't there the potential to cause more damage to younger ones when the schools return by telling them to stay away from this, don't touch that, wash your hands at their most formative age every 5-10 minutes?
And that there is, James, and that is precisely why I've made clear at quite a few of these conferences, and so has the Minister for Education, that social distancing in schools, while it might be practical within the classroom, it's not necessarily practical in the playground, in other areas of the school, and we have to recognise that fact. In terms of social distancing out in public, these things are under constant review. The Chief Minister has already announced a move from 2 metres to 1 metre, and depending on how cases go, we can look at things again, because we also recognise that there are some businesses out there, particularly around the entertainment business, that can't operate with social distancing in play. It's not practical for them to do so. But at the moment, we're 19 days in without case. When we hit something like 28 days, that'll be 2 life cycles of the virus, and then other decisions can be made over the next couple of weeks. But for the time being, our recommendation is that people, wherever possible, should still social distance.
Thank you. Now, as I said, we've had a lot of questions that have been submitted. A lot of questions have been submitted today. We actually only have one call. I don't know if it was something we said or they just wanted us to submit them on their behalf. But we have on the line Greg from Douglas. Good afternoon, Greg. The Minister is awaiting your questions.
Good afternoon, Greg.
Hello, David. First off, I'd like to thank you. Obviously, you've done a brilliant, diligent job. We're privileged to be in the situation that we're here on the Isle of Man. The question I have is quite specific to me, my family's business. Me and my father run the Douglas Snooker Club, but I'm hoping other people can utilise this information and look at the options which they might have. I wondered if we could register a specific risk assessment for our business and look to start opening. The first stage of reopening. It includes sanitising at the entrance to be used before and after you come into the club, into the bar, should I say. What else have we got? Social distancing to be adhered to at all times. There'd be only table service, and it would be bookings only. So there'd be a maximum of 16 people booked in, and it's a 70 square metre room, so we wouldn't be flooding the place. Like I say, table service only, and then limit the alcohol as well, and only if someone has got a table booked with a substantial time. Do you think this is a possibility in the next couple of weeks?
It is. The press conference I was at with the Chief Minister on, I think it was Friday last week. I do lose track of the days. It might have been Thursday last week, actually, now I think about it. We did announce that from the 29th of June, we would be looking around pubs and clubs, including private members' clubs, etc., to be able to try and open. I know lots of businesses at the moment are risk assessing and trying to get things ready for when they open. So we hope that come next week, actually, we'll be able to start making announcements about the plans to be able to get those sort of places open, because one of the things I certainly do recognise is that there has been a huge impact on those businesses having to remain shut for such a long period of time, when bills are still coming in as well to be paid, has put a real strain on them. So we are looking to try and get things resolved as quickly as possible in that area.
The additional benefits we'll have is obviously rebuilding some of the economy as well. The economy is taking such a hit, and obviously if people can get out there spending, which they're willing to do at the minute, because we can't get on holiday. The weather's great. We want to go out socialising and enjoying ourselves after a long time indoors. So hopefully we can get people spending in a sensible and safe and controlled manner.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, Greg. I think the Manx public has reacted to what they need to do around this virus marvellously. It's not me as minister, it's the Manx public that have got us into the position that we are currently in, and it is and it's important that we reward that, that where it's safe to do so, we can get the economy restarted, we can get people to have the confidence to go back out into that economy and spending their money, and we'll emerge from this much better than many other jurisdictions will, and we fully recognise that we do need to kickstart things, and we need to start doing that quite quickly.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you again for the hard work.
Thank you very much, Greg. Thank you for your time as well, and taking time out of your day this afternoon. Just looking at the questions, moving on from Greg, Rob says the public have generally been very impressed and grateful for the government and how it's managed this situation in the island. The majority have followed the rules. We know that they've accepted the the cautious baby steps approach. But he says, is there not a danger now that there's clearly no virus in the Isle of Man, he says, of losing some of that public goodwill and support by being too slow in getting back to that normal day-to-day routine, work, school, etc.?
Well, I think I've addressed part of that in the questions I answered for Greg, but yes, there is. I mean, obviously, like I say, the Manx public has engaged absolutely marvellously. The overwhelming majority of people have obeyed the rules. They've sacrificed a lot of their life, to be frank, this year in order to ensure we're in the great position we're in. And it is important that sacrifice is now rewarded, and where possible, we can do it. The one thing I would dispute in that, though, is that the island is virus-free. People know me to be very cautious, but like I say, when you're dealing with a virus, you can never 100% say that it's virus-free, particularly COVID-19, where we know lots of people don't present with any symptoms but are still contagious, and people who present with low-level symptoms that they might dismiss as something else that is also contagious. But we are in a good position, and certainly, as the Chief Minister announced from this podium at the press conferences last week, we are keen now to start moving things along and getting things as back to normal as we possibly can as quickly as possible.
What does it take, incidentally, for a nation, an island, to declare itself COVID-free, virus-free?
I mean, the only way you could ever, in all honesty, declare yourself COVID-free is if there is a vaccine available, because, viruses otherwise will continue to go around the world. There will always be the odd case here and there. And I think that's one of the messages I want to put out again today, is that we've had a great run of 19 days with 0 cases, but equally, if we do have the odd case appearing here and there, that's not a sign of failure either. We have to go back to the start of this and remember that the whole purpose of the actions that were taken was in order to protect our health service, to make sure that, unlike we saw in other countries such as Italy, our health services didn't get overwhelmed. We've been able to do that, so people should not get exceptionally nervous. They should not worry if the odd case still does appear here and there. The government medium-term plan lays out how we would respond depending upon the number of cases over a 3-day average, and the likelihood is with any virus there will be the odd case that will still keep emerging.
Let us take a question now from Michael. He wants to talk about antibody testing, and he's asking how the process was determined for who actually undergoes that testing.
Well, what we wanted to focus on originally with antibody testing for the first 5,000, because of course we have bought 10,000 tests in total, is we wanted to focus on those that we could get very quickly in a medical setting. The type of antibody test that's been certified is a proper blood test, so it has to be done in a clinical setting. It's not a finger prick home kit. It has to be done properly and correctly. So what we have looked at is people who are flowing through the hospital first, so all hospital attendees through the emergency department who would have had a blood test already, they will be tested. Testing all blood test referrals that have come via the GP and hospital outpatients as well, including paediatrics. Close contacts and high-risk contacts of confirmed cases. So people, for instance, who have actually lived with someone who's had the virus, been tested positive, but they themselves haven't gone on to develop any symptoms. So we want to see how widespread that is. Blood donors, antenatal patients, and healthcare workers as well, who've actually been out there on the front line. So that's the criteria for the first 5,000 tests, because we believe that will give us a good breakdown of age range, of different types of people within the population and different backgrounds, and from there then we will look to profile what we're going to do with the second 5,000, which may be much more random community sampling, but it is going to be an exceptionally interesting thing to see as to just how widespread it has been across the island.
Thank you. Judith has another question, just moving tack slightly. When will patients be able to have a face-to-face appointment with a GP as opposed to a telephone diagnosis?
Well, the first thing to say is face-to-face appointments haven't stopped during the pandemic. What has changed is the triage system at the start. So basically the first point of contact is via phone. The GP has then assessed if the person needs to be seen face-to-face. So I know there's a lot of people that much prefer to do things face-to-face than over the phone. I'm one of those people. I much prefer, despite my love of technology, to actually do things in person, face-to-face. That's something that will be looked at over the next few weeks and months. But as the Department of Health and Social Care, in some areas, video conferencing and telephone triage, we will want to keep to a certain extent, because it is actually much more efficient and it does get patients seen a lot quicker than they do with the face-to-face. So there's certain elements we will want to keep longer term, but in terms of general face-to-face appointments with GPs, they will be coming back online as soon as we believe it's safe to do so, and we reassess the position every 2 weeks.
A further question, David has submitted. He wants to know if there is PPE for children. He attended A&E recently, was given adult equipment for his 5-year-old, which didn't fit correctly.
No, there isn't PPE available for children, and if it's the case I think it is, I've actually spoken to the hospital around this case, and children aren't required in those circumstances to have the mask. One of the things we've got to remember is why that PPE is being used. It's not being used to protect the child. The mask does not protect the child. What it does is it protects it protects people around the wearer. So it's not a measure that is required to protect the patient. But I have had those conversations because I think I'm aware of that particular case.
And also a double question here from Gloria and Sarah. They're asking just for a reminder, if nothing else, about the guidance regarding visiting private residential homes. And when we saw an uplifting sight in Douglas yesterday, of course, of some patients being wheeled outside to see their loved ones for the first time in months. But just an update or just a clarification on that guidance, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, one of the important things to actually say is, of course, in relation to private homes, they have to make their own decisions. We will issue guidance to them, but obviously it's not enforceable guidance by DHSC. So I know that some homes are more comfortable around allowing visitation than others are, and it is down to the individual private home whether they allow that. But in terms of for care, we actually suggest that the visit should be for a predetermined period of time, based on the risk assessments, whether social distancing can take place, preferably, as we saw with one particular home recently, preferably outside visits if possible, so that people can keep outside and see their loved ones from a distance. This has been an exceptionally hard time for those in a care environment and in a residential environment, because for a lot of them, their lives are their family support networks, and I know it's been very difficult for the families as well. But we are now releasing things in that regard. But again, it's important we do it in a staged way, because we do have to remember that these people are some of the most vulnerable in our society, particularly when it comes to COVID-19. But I would hope that private homes will, wherever possible, facilitate some form of visiting so that people now can at least see their loved ones in person rather than over a TV screen.
You'll have noticed the headlines today in the adjacent aisle, if you like. A few routine scans, operations, treatments are taking place. There's a big backlog in the UK. I would imagine there's few taking place at Nobles too. So how do you envisage this situation being addressed here?
So obviously we had to suspend services as well. It is going to be a slow process getting back to what I would term the old normal of services, because we do need to keep alongside that a capacity to deal with COVID-19. So we can't just turn everything back to the way it was, because that means we have no capacity for any future COVID cases. But what we have started doing was Back to Health, which was a document I launched 2 weeks ago, where we turned certain services back on, including endoscopy, including scans, including some cancer treatments as well. And what's important is we keep building on that. So I'll be making further announcements, hopefully at the end of this week, of further services that we'll be able to turn on. In terms of the backlog, particularly around elective surgery that had to stop, there is going to be, and I've acknowledged this publicly before, a period of time where we are going to have longer waiting lists while we try to bring it down. We will look wherever possible at waiting list initiatives to try and decrease backlogs in severe circumstances, but we do have to recognise that COVID-19 and the response to that has had an impact on our long-term waiting lists across services.
Thank you. Let us move on to compassionate travel here now, because there's two specifics from members of the public. Kieran is asking, could the island introduce arrival compulsory testing along with track and trace in place of quarantine for those who are travelling here on compassionate grounds?
In terms of testing on arrival, there are several issues around that, because it wouldn't just be a single test that would have to be done, it would have to be multiple tests to ensure the accuracy, because we know that people who are asymptomatic with COVID-19, in the early days of the incubation period, they may not even show up on a PCR test, also known as a swab test, to most of the general public. So it may come back as negative, but they still have the virus. That is why at the moment the recommendation is even the people we refer for testing via 111, if they get tested and it comes back negative, they still have to self-isolate for 14 days, because that is the safest approach. I know there's other jurisdictions that have taken the view that they will then do double or even third swabbing several days later, and people self-isolate until they get the third swab, and then they're allowed out into the wider community. But there is actually a report by the University of Bristol that came out very recently that shows that in relation to COVID-19, in up to 20% of asymptomatic cases of people carrying the virus, a PCR test may not pick it up. So there's a balance between our risk profile and also the public health risk. And I think at the moment we're not in that space of testing people upon arrival.
Thank you. And I suspect this one is for the steam packet company, but you may be able to shed some
James.
light on it. You've answered everything else. James and Mary would like to know if there are any plans for a sailing from Belfast to the Isle of Man to help with repatriation. They've been shielding in Northern Ireland, and to come home would effectively need them to sail to the UK, then on to the island, and they say increasing their risks.
I'm aware of cases like this. I've dealt with several cases myself where obviously people are in the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland and feel it's actually safe to come back from that route. At the moment, unfortunately, the only route for repatriation is the UK. Again, it's something we keep under constant review. We do deal with the steam packet, we deal with the airlines as well around the potential for being able to ramp up further numbers of travel. But at the moment, unfortunately, the only route in is the UK. That is something we potentially may look at, particularly with the situation Ireland finds itself in, which at the moment is a lot better situation than the UK itself, but it's not guaranteed at the moment in time.
Thank you. And from compassionate leave to maternity care, Jane is wondering if dads-to-be or designated birthing partners can be given PPE on arrival at the maternity ward. At the moment, she says that the mum-to-be has to go in alone. Then when labour's established, dad can go in, then he has to come out and then go back in when mum and baby are on the ward. And she says, surely this is more of an infection risk than the dad just going in and staying in with PPE on.
Well, one of the things we know with COVID-19 is in the way it spreads is its highest spread is over 15 minutes and indoors, and the length of time over 15 minutes that you stay exponentially increases that risk. So that is where the advice is based on. The advice that we follow is the Royal College of Gynecology's advice and also the Royal College of Nursing's advice. So that is what we currently have in place. Again, though, and you've heard me say this several times today at this podium, it is a policy that's constantly kept under review, and I know it is one that certainly I'm keen for us to look at again in light of our current situation, but we need to balance it across the risk that a maternity ward, and particularly pregnant women and newborn babies, are at risk from COVID-19. They are classed within the vulnerable group, and we've got to balance that off. But I know it is causing great concern and great angst to many soon-to-be parents who feel that they're not going to get that level of comfort that they normally would in normal circumstances. We recognise that, and we will be constantly reviewing the position.
We talk about comfort and reassurance. What measures, and you will have answered this in various stages over the last few weeks, but what is government doing, do you think, to remove that sense of fear that some people are feeling about going back to work, about sending their kids to school?
Returning the crossing in corridors. So your employer does actually have those obligations still in place. And if necessary, they can be reported to health and safety if you believe they're breaching those obligations. So it is. So I would say that if you're feeling uncomfortable about going to work, speak to your employer. Try and deal with your employer first and see if reasonable adjustments can be made. I know there's some employers or category that have said they can continue to work from home. If they can do their job from home unhindered, they're not going to require them go back into the office. But every employment situation is unique, and the best thing I can stress in those circumstances is have a meeting with your employer and go through those concerns to see if they can alleviate them for you. But if you do believe that your employer isn't actually complying with health and safety, then there is mechanisms to report that.
And I should say as well, there is a number you can call, the COVID support line as well, which I will bring to you at the end of this. In fact, I'll bring it to you now. It's 686 455 686 455, which is the COVID-19 business support line. We have gone through all our questions, actually, which is great news. Just finally, then, on a broader note, from a medical standpoint, Minister, COVID's now one of several viruses that will circulate, and there'll be more in the future. Has the Isle of Man actually got the resources to meet those future challenges?
I think we have. We have adapted very, very quickly, and I want to say a huge thank you to all of the staff across the whole of health and social care, and also those out working in the private sector as well, particularly in care homes, nursing homes, residential homes, because the way that our health and social care professionals have reacted has been absolutely amazing. We have provision in the hospital. We know the procedures that need to be taken with people with COVID-19. We've got the isolation policies in place, and even if it's low numbers of cases, those policies will be able to remain in place. So I do believe we've got the resources to manage this. We don't know what the future holds. We've been doing this week by week, really, to be frank, because things change so fast. So we don't know if there'll be a vaccine. We don't know if COVID-19 itself will just die out across the world for some reason, or whether it's going to be with us forevermore. We really, at this point, don't know about that. But what is important is, I believe, that the Manx public have got the Isle of Man into an absolutely amazing situation, and I thank everyone for that. And what's important is we maintain that position now.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Greg in Douglas, and thank you to all the members of the public who have submitted questions. Just a reminder, COVID-19 community support at gov.im. COVID-19 community support at gov.im is the email address if you'd like to send any further questions for future briefings. And I think that is us. We're going to finish on a bright note, as if seeing the Minister's smiley face isn't enough. A tribute to our NHS. This is inspired really by the many fundraising efforts that have been going on both locally and across the British Isles, and prompted an island resident, Steve Dawson, to come forward with an idea, raise funds for charity. He contacted a number of local performers, Gary Chattle, Sonia Callan, and the rest, as they say, is history. They've been producing, Dave Armstrong's been producing as well, and that's resulted in the Manx Dreamers singing for our NHS, raising funds for the big Manx community charity. Lots of logistics to pull all this together, but great teamwork, some really impressive production values as well. A very uplifting video coming your way. Enjoy, and a very good afternoon. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, James.
Oh, I could ride on the wings of the bluebird as she sings.
Emergency alarms would never ring.
But they ring, healthcare rise, wipe the sleep out of their eyes.
These days the day ahead and what it brings.
Cheer up, sleepy Jean. No, what can it be to our daydream believer and our NHS needs? We can guarantee
our new time start and end with our island on the mend. Hopeful from our lockdown, we'll be free.